Chapter 201. Damn, what kind of forest is this? Astana complained, looking back into the gloomy forest. I can't go back out. His eyes were full of regret as they looked back at the path he had just walked in on. And then he stopped. What? Why isn't there a way out? The nobles who were listening to Astana's words turned their heads to where he was looking as well. There really isn't a way out. The tree over there looks familiar. Couldn't we have come in from there? No, I think we came from over there. Everyone's opinions were divided. Then all at once, everyone looked at Astana. What else could they do? Astana was the leader of their group, so it was only natural for them to look at him. Why are you looking at me? However, Astana cried out in a loud voice. Shouldn't you all find a way out for me and serve me? That's what Astana thought being a leader was all about, to be the most comfortable and the most important priority. He was born as the first prince as well as the only legitimate heir, so perhaps it was natural as he lived his entire life in such a manner. At that time, there was someone who stepped forward. First, we should find a monster. When we do, I will step forward to serve you. It was Belisac, who had pulled out a long sword. It seemed like this time he had a new dagger and had made up his mind, meaning he wanted to be a close aide to Astana again. Okay, you're the only one I trust, Belisac. No matter what motive he had, Astana still liked it. However, he had to get through this eerie forest while being at the forefront. Then I'll guard the rear. As Belsac stepped up, others also noticed and followed suit. No matter how strange Madman's forest is, there would still be a way out, right? That's right. Besides, how many of us are there? Even if a monster appears, well, we'll be able to get rid of it. Furthermore, they were all nobles who had been practicing swordsmanship since they were young. All of them knew how to wield a sword in the case of an emergency. A weak sense of relief and confidence returned to all of their faces. Then, shall we go straight ahead? Belsac asked Astana. What a stupid brat. Astana added another insult to his impression of Belsac as he replied with a frown. No, the first thing we should do is get used to the area surrounding the entrance. Actually, it was simply because he was too afraid to go further in the forest, but Astana made up a reasonable excuse on the spot. Oh, as expected, you're the only one I'll trust, Your Highness. The words of Astana, who didn't want to go deeper into the forest, made his followers' faces glow with admiration. Astana shrugged at their reaction and pretended to be rational. Although we're in this sort of situation, other people's situations won't be too different from ours either. Even if it's that kid, Astana muttered, remembering Perez. What can only 4 people do? There were as many as a dozen people who followed him. Astana's tense shoulders stretched again triumphantly, and as he was about to take a step, pong, suddenly there was a loud sound echoing through the quiet forest. Ah, Astana shrieked loudly, covering his head and crouching down. So someone must have set off a flare, Belsac said while pointing to a red flame that shot up into a sky in the distance. I knew that. Astana shouted, pretending to be calm. But weren't we going to go that way? It was very likely that the reason for the flare was because of a monster. So if anyone wanted to win by catching a monster, the right decision would be to run in that direction. Astana, however, moved calmly toward the opposite direction of the flare. Let's go this way. However, there was no one who opposed his decision, because no one wanted to go in the direction where there was something that caused a flare to be fired. Slash, 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 slash. The border between the land around the mansion and the forest, various attractions had been set up for the nobles who did not participate in the hunting competition, such as tables full of excellent food and simple games that could be enjoyed by men and women of all ages. Exciting music was also playing constantly in the background. By the time noon had passed, Emperor Jovanes, who came out of the bedroom, was already drunk. Was this all prepared by your daughter? Jovanes suddenly asked Galyahan, who was pouring the liquor. Yes, that's right. She worked harder after hearing that His Majesty was coming. Gallian replied with a proud smile. Yes, yes, I envy you. I really do. Jovin said quietly, bringing a glass to his lips. I'm not just saying this because she's my granddaughter, but our Tia is quite capable. Lulac slid in from the side too. Ha! Eventually, Jovins released a big sigh. Lulac, who was still watching, smiled and said, You must have a lot of worries, Your Majesty. You knew that, yet you still kept bragging about your granddaughter. Jovins grumbled. I'll take my leave for a moment then. Galliahan tactfully moved away. The Emperor, who had downed his leftover liquor in one gulp, stared somewhere and opened his mouth. I'm still healthy. But why is everyone talking about succession? Doesn't it feel like they're telling me to die soon? It was not uncommon for an emperor to be extremely reluctant to talk about succession, since power is something that can't even be shared with one's own flesh and blood. I think Anjanus is very anxious, that they seem worried about His Majesty, as if they're only worried. As he opened his mouth, Javanes wrinkled his nose and poured some liquor into Lulak's half-empty glass. They're pushing me as if I'm about to die right now. If only there was no one around him, otherwise he'd empty the bottle immediately. Lulak also shook his head. The Empress must be in a good mood. There was no way it was the Empress Rabini who was pushing Jovanes to this point like this. However, the initial prey feels it instinctively, the fact that something is aiming at them in the bushes. So they run in the direction they shouldn't have gone. They don't even know that the way they're heading toward is a cliff. Dulak grinned under his long beard and suggested in an anxious tone, "Your Majesty, this old man speaks out of old age. Why don't you be careful for the time being?" Careful? Yeah, well, something like eating and drinking outside the Imperial Palace or stuff that's sent from the Empress Palace. The Empress Palace? One of Javane's eyebrows rose. "Isn't that going a bit too far?" Javanes lowered his voice as if he was angry, but it wasn't very intimidating. His eyes were already shaking and his stony expression was cracking. The seed of doubt tends to take root horrifyingly quick. "I must have made a slip of tongue." Nulak tactfully retreated. "I'll take a punishment drink as a sign of apology." However, there was a deep smile hidden behind the wineglass. "It's always been fun to ruin Angena's future." Slush, slush, slush. "Didn't I tell you that it was going to be like that?" Clarivan said, pointing to a red flare that was rising above the forest. "That's already the third time that's it. It's only been a few hours since the competition has started, and it's already like that. Maybe they were surprised by nothing, like a rabbit or something like a rabbit, or a rabbit-like thing, something like that." Clarivan put on his glasses and smirked. "Magic flows in Madman's forest, and monsters hunt it. But aren't those stories from when people got closer to the center of the forest? Right, but the flare came from the area near the entrance. Isn't everyone a bit too scared? Lombardi's knights were seen rushing to the area where the flare was fired. If people are scared, they should come out on their own feet so everyone can see their sincerity. It's hard for the people of my house." "That's what I mean, but," Clarivan said, looking beyond the entrance of Madman's forest, "no one knows what nerves such a loud noise will startle. And the smell from the blood of the hunted monsters would increase that fear." Perhaps because of the cold wind blowing, Clarivan's voice was cooler than usual. It was then, "Pong, pong, pong," down over there. Although it was still in the area, close to the entrance of the forest, the three flares were all fired at the same time, and further from the entrance. "Oh, something must have happened over there." Clarivan's eyes sparkled. Slash, slash, slash. Astana's group was walking along the edge of the forest. Hok, heok, heok. There was no conversation, only the sound of heavy breathing could be heard. It was a strange thing, although it seemed as if they had been walking for a few hours, even though the mountain terrain was not harsh. None of them seemed to be able to catch their breath. It must be because of the magic. Someone muttered in the middle of taking a breath. "Yeah, that's right. This is all because of the magic. That's why their bodies felt as heavy as wet cotton, and their heads were dazed." Rustle. A strange sound was heard in the grass nearby. "Ah, shut up." Belsac, who was still walking ahead, shouted and cut the grass in a big motion. But there was nothing there. Belsac knew as well. About an hour ago, the bushes closest to where the group was walking shook for no reason. There were times when he ran away in surprise, and there were times when he bravely cut the grass. But each time, there was nothing in it. "In all likelihood," Belsac said, looking back at Astana. "It seems that we're all hearing hallucinations together. I heard that magic flows through Madman's forest. That's probably why." Hearing hallucinations. Fear was slowly appearing in the faces of others. "Your Highness, why don't you give up on this and leave?" The first of the Maimbert family asked Astana. "That's right, Your Grace. The third of Beletiron also said the same thing. Just say the word and I'll fire the flare." He even showed the red flare he was holding in his hand. "Are you crazy? No way." But Astana shook his head stubbornly. He was not allowed to give up in front of His Majesty. Empress Rabini had emphasized this several times. It was then, Russell. This time, the sound was heard from the grass a little further behind his back. Belsac did not swing his sword this time. He thought he was just hearing a hallucination anyways, but everyone's expressions were strange. Everyone pointed behind Belsac. Crack! It was then that a strange sound was heard. This was not a hallucination. Belsac looked back quickly in surprise and shouted, Monster! Scaly green skin, fangs that protruded from the lips, and unusually long arms, and a huge body. Oh! The group quickly became frozen in fear. Thud, thud. The monster approached them, one step at a time, but none of them could move. Someone, do something. Astana was the only one who pushed Belsac forward and shouted, The flare! Eventually, it was in the moment when the third of Beletiron tried to pull the string of the flare. Pong! The monster's head burst with a sound familiar to the firing of a flare. Flop! Thud! The monster's head rolled onto the floor as the huge decapitated head fell forward powerlessly. Then there was Perez covered in the monster's green blood. "Looks like I found you here," Perez said, looking at Astana. End of chapter 201. Chapter 202. He got goosebumps all over his body. Astana hesitantly took a step back. Although he was wandering through the forest, scared of monsters, the monster he feared the most was Perez, not a monster he had never seen before. The red armor dyed green by the monster's blood shone eerily. Swing. The sword that Perez swung lightly at Astana made a scary sound. The blue fluid that was on the blade fell onto the ground like rain. I've already warned you, Perez said in a low voice. Keep out of my sight. Wait a second. Astana cried out, but it was too late. Perez was already striding toward Astana with his sword. So stop. Stop it. Astana cried out belatedly. Second Prince, please stop. Astana's henchman, who once hesitated to get closer, suddenly rushed in all at once. Your Highness, if he dies so easily here, you'll regret it later. The Academy trio, who had been guarding Perez back, also quickly approached Perez to stop him. Astana trembled, because Perez's red eyes seemed to squeeze his neck. Even though his eyes were usually reluctant to look directly at him, something was different today. The dark aura of the forest seemed to fluctuate in his eyes while he looked directly at Astana without blinking. Your Highness, Lignite shouted, grabbing Perez by the shoulder. Only then did Perez stop. But the eyes looking down at Astana, were still there. Here, drink this. Pedro brought something from the saddle of the horse. It was a canteen made of black leather. Several more canteens of the same shape were tied to the horse to which Perez's party's luggage was tied. It's because of the magic. You're going crazy because of the magic. Everyone in the area heard Pedro's words. It's safe to drink a little bit of this medicine. Pedro grabbed the canteen and pressed it into Perez's hands. Gulp. Perez took a dip of the liquid in the canteen and wiped his mouth roughly with his sleeve. The red eyes stayed the same, but the murderous light was gone. Magic must be driving people crazy. It wasn't called Madman's Forest for no reason. Astana's aides muttered in fear. Then a loud noise burst out, one after another. Bong, bong, bong. In the end, 3 people set off their flares. When Perez stepped back, Astana, whose complexion looked a bit better, glared at them. I'm sorry, Your Highness, but this forest is too dangerous. That's right, Your Highness should also return to safety with us. They made their excuses in a hurry. However, Astana unexpectedly did not shout at them. Rather, he was caught off guard momentarily. Should I leave them? Should I leave with them too? His hand instinctively went for his flare, the owner of his dogs. Perez laughed coldly. What? That kind of monster would have been caught if all of you had come at it together, Perez said, pointing to the corpse of the monster that had fallen to the ground with the tip of his chin. Then everyone's eyes were on it at the same time. No way, was it that small? It had definitely been a huge monster. The pounding of its footsteps echoed through the ground, but the size of the monster on the floor was around that of an adult male's. Its muscular appearance was terrifying, but it was as Perez said. It would have been enough if everyone had come at it all at once. Poof. I can't believe they were so scared of that. Are all the aristocrats of the capital this pathetic? Anyone who had a sword should have just swung it. Tisk, tisk. The Academy trio mocked them loudly, as if they were intentionally letting them hear. Let's go, Perez said as he turned his back on them. Even if I don't handle them today, they'll still die in the forest. Having said that, Perez looked back and checked the saddle of his horse. A satisfied smile lightly flashed across his face. Slash, slash, slash. It's sunset. Those who finished hunting were returning to the entrance of the forest one by one. Oh, they have 3 of them. There were 5 over there. Ah, aren't they the smaller ones? Bigger monsters have higher scores. The nobles who had not participated and were wasting their time by playing cards started placing bets on the results of the hunt. Then Perez, the second prince, appeared. Wow, 7. He's definitely got the most so far. The reaction of the nobles was intense. On the other hand, Astana, the first prince. You came back empty-handed. Wasn't he in the middle of a bet with the second prince? Astana's poor performance kept everyone from laughing. Most of the nobles had shut their mouths in order to trap the mockery that would unknowingly come out. No, who is that? Someone pointed to a person who had just come out of the entrance. It's Sir Ramona Brown. It was Ramona who was dressed in a blue armor, making her red hair stand out even more strikingly. A large object was hanging from Ramona's saddle as she walked in with a hint of exhaustion. A monster's head? I can't believe she caught such a big monster. Isn't it harder than catching 10 of the smaller ones? Unlike the others who had cut an ear or the arm of a monster, it was Ramona who had cut off the monster's neck. Ramona, who had inadvertently cut off her hair due to the rules, looked a bit sad as she watched the other participants. Ho ho, as expected of the Brown household. There were frequent mentions of the Brown household. In the end, it's a fight between His Highness the Second Prince and Sir Brown. I still think the Second Prince will win. No one mentioned Astana. Astana's existence was completely forgotten in the competition. Damn it, Astana could feel the eyes of Emperor Jovane staring at him from afar. the disapproval that was mixed in with a look that said, "Of course, that's all you can do." Second prince, "Yes, your majesty." "Good job, you looked very nice." "Thank you, your majesty." However, Astana did not receive any flattery or praise. There was just the sound of a tongue clicking in disappointment. "Well, your highness." It was at that moment that Belsac sneaked something out from behind him. "Let's try drinking this before we go hunting tomorrow." "What's this?" When I ran into the second prince group in the forest, I swiped one of the canteens they had drunk while they were talking about magic. "What is it?" Astana's eyes sparkled. I wanted to steal more, but I was afraid that I'd get caught. "If there was such a thing, you should have told me earlier." Astana snatched the canteen away quickly. "Yes, with this, the monsters of the forest weren't very scary. Judging from the monsters Perez had killed with just one sword, there was no monster he couldn't catch if about 10 people attacked all at once. However, he was still afraid of going into the forest because of the magic that was said to make people go crazy. There probably won't be any more hallucinations either, right?" Astana laughed. It was as if he had just won 10,000 horses. "Well done, Belsac." Astana's hand touched Belsac's shoulder. Thank you, your majesty." Belsac, who had just briefly been complimented by the prince, didn't know what to do. "Let's go back into the forest," Astana said as he gave Perez one last look. Your highness. Your highness. Highness." The flustered Belsac followed Astana and tried to shrink himself into something smaller. "It's too dangerous at night. Who's staying there until the night? There's still an hour or two left until the sun sets completely, so I'm going to hunt some more. Everyone, follow me." Eventually, the people who had all died quietly on the inside slowly headed back into the forest. "Oh, I think I should discourage them from going." A flustered Lord Sloane, who had been escorting the Emperor today, shouted. End of chapter 202. Chapter 203. Your Majesty, the first prince is now. "Let it go," Jovane said, glaring disapprovingly at Astana's back. "I doubt he'll go much further from the entrance. He's lacking." He didn't like it. He had so many shortcomings, so many flaws. Then Perez came into the view of Emperor Jovane's, another son who silently nodded to him who was sitting on the podium, then returned to his villa. "You can't be thinking of making the second prince the crown prince, right?" He suddenly remembered the words of the Empress that was said on the carriage on their way here. His mother's lowly blood that runs through his veins couldn't possibly be the blood of the Emperor of Lambru. He agreed with her. However, the second prince seemed to resemble the Emperor Durelli more than the first prince. Isn't that enough? It was better than the first prince, who kept showing the shortcomings of the Ingenuous. Emperor Jovan's eyes lingered on the back of Perez for a long time. But there was one thing he failed to notice. It was the three people who followed Perez and always stayed together. Steely and Pedro, who had followed Perez, grumbled before going back into the forest. Slash, slash, slash. It was the second day of the hunting competition. Astana laughed while taking a swig of the unknown drug in the canteen. "Good, very good. The hunt was going very smoothly. No, it was going even better than that. You're already got 18, your highness." Belsac shouted while cutting off a monster's right arm. "Let's go. We'll have to catch a larger one next time," Astana said, a bit short of breath. "Why don't we take a break before going again, your highness?" "That's right, I can't walk any further." His whole entourage responded, echoing their fatigue. The party, which had started with around 10 people, had already dwindled down to just 6. Everyone had given up due to Astana's unreasonable behavior and ended up either injured or worn out. "Shut up," Astana yelled out fiercely. Your highness." His followers flinched in unison. It was because Astana, who was covered in green blood, with a sword in hand, was terrifying. It was like they were watching the second prince from yesterday. The state of being out of one's mind, as if possessed by the magic. 5 before sunset, yesterday, and 13 since we started hunting today. The hunt is going well today. So if you can't keep up with it, then get out. Now he even swung his sword with one hand at his aides as a threat. Astana was always rude, but not like this. He never forgot that the crowd following him was made up of nobles who all had a strong sense of pride. But now Astana treated them as if they were flies that were bothering him, annoyingly buzzing around his ears. Only the ones who can handle the difficult hand should come. If you're going to fall back, then leave quietly. Your clumsy attacks won't be of much help anyways, so don't bother me. Astana huffed again, habitually inhaling the medicated drink for a headache. I must have broken through some sort of limit, otherwise how else would I be this full of energy? Astana couldn't hide his excitement. Belsac said that the drug he stole would prevent him from experiencing the effects of the magic, and in the end, it ended up working so well. Yesterday, he was drained by the magic of the forest, and he was tired and out of breath. Even if he had only walked a bit, however, there was no such thing today. His footsteps were light, and his sword was outstretched. He wasn't even afraid, even if the monsters he encountered in the forest started appearing before frequently. Rather, he thought it was quite nice. He even thought it would be nice if the next monster would appear immediately after killing one. "Belsac, you follow me." Astana turned to Belsac and said, "Since stealing the canteen yesterday, Belsac has been acting as Astana's right-hand man again, just like before." "Yes, Your Highness." It was natural that Belsac was excited. "Make sure you keep an eye out of red armor, and make sure he doesn't come after us, all right?" Red armor. It meant Perez red armor. He's the only one who I need to be careful of. He's the only one. Astana muttered as he took another step forward. What he had to watch out for now is this forest was Perez who was in red armor. That was all. Slash, slash, slash. The third and last day of the hunting competition. Die, die. Astana was on top of a monster and stabbing it with his knife. Whenever Astana's body moved, a chilling sound rang out. "Your Highness," Belsa called to Astana. But Astana, bent on killing the monsters, couldn't hear a sound. In the last 3 days, Astana has caught a total of over 40 monsters. It was the result of hunting and continuing to wander from sunrise to evening, like a person who was possessed by something. "Look, shouldn't we stop His Highness now?" Belsa cautiously asked his companion. Question mark. But there was no reply. When he turned around, the place where the firstborn of the Brexton household, the last person to remain other than him, stood, was empty. While Astana was obsessed with the hunt, he had slipped away without warning to give up on the competition. Gulp. Belsac's throat was dry. The only people left were Astana and Belsac. Yeah, maybe this is a good thing. Belsac thought so. Before he came to the hunting competition, his mother Cyril had said so. As dangerous as it may be, there should still be opportunities waiting for you. Do you understand what I'm saying, Belsac? In this situation, where everyone had already fled, he was the only one who stood by His Highness to the end. If this isn't true loyalty, then what is? This is your last chance to regain his confidence. Belsac nodded, recalling what Cyril had told him. Astana seemed a little different from usual, but he was just enjoying the hunt. Besides, he was almost certain that it wouldn't go well if he tried to stop him in the current situation. Belsac decided to stay put without saying anything else. It was then. "Belsac, get me the canteen," Astana ordered. "Yes, here it is." Belsac moved his body quickly and handed him the canteen. The water bottle was light and almost completely empty. "Your Highness will definitely win," Belsac said with a smile. He said it, thinking that Astana would be happy. Belsac's prediction was correct. Astana smirked while looking at the monster's head. The blood of the monster that had already been soaked into Astana tainted Astana's smile. "Right, Perez, even that lowly thing couldn't have caught so many monsters. The monsters around here must have all fled." Astana snickered dangerously. "Yeah, I must be stronger than him." "What?" Belsac tilted his head. "Stronger than the Swordmaster, the second prince. Look at today. The day we slaughtered so many monsters, that kid could never do this." "But, shut up. I'm stronger. If we run into him now, I'll kill him in one go." Astana cried out as if he was a bloodhound. Gasp. Belsac shut his mouth. It was because Astana's words, which was smeared with green blood that had already hardened, was approaching his throat. Yes, excuse me. That's right, Your Highness is stronger, right? You think so too, don't you?" Astana said with a blank look in his eyes. "Okay, then I have a good idea." A good idea? At that moment, a bad feeling gripped Belsac. "I'm going to kill that dirty half-blood. Let's go." Astana started to go forward in big strides. He didn't even intend to take care of the body of the last monster he had killed. "I can kill him now. No one will know, because we're in the forest." Astana continued to talk to himself, giggling. "If I kill that lowly thing, everything will be over. It will all be over. His Majesty will no longer ignore me. My mother would be proud of me for doing so well." "Where are you, red armor, red armor?" Astana chanted it like a spell. In the dark forest, Astana's eyes only found red. That's all. Astana laughed. As he walked through the forest confidently, he suddenly came across a small meadow. And on the other side, like magic, Perez appeared. Red armor. It must have been Perez, seeing as the Lombardy girl was next to him. Astana gripped his sword, then started running blindly towards Perez. "Your Highness," Belsac, who had followed behind him, was startled and called out to him, but Astana did not stop. There was no better chance than now to kill Perez. Astana kept running, staring only at Perez's unlucky face. "Stop him." At that time, people who he had not noticed until now came into Astana's line of vision. Imperial Knight. Chapter 204. The last day of the hunting competition was dawning. Oh, is this my armor? Emperor Jovanes asked, lifting up a sparkling golden breastplate. Yes, your majesty. I have specifically prepared for you a color that stands out. Yes, yes, with this sort of color, you'll be able to see me even in the middle of Madman's forest. Jovanes burst into laughter while patting me on the shoulder. Oh, ever since then, seriously, I slipped back while saying, your Majesty's safety is our first priority. It will be troublesome if Jovanes gets hurt in the hunting competition that was hosted by me. Ha 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 ha. You speak extremely well. The Emperor burst into laughter once again. I felt like I had a thorn in my heart since I hadn't been able to come to the hunting grounds for a long time. Now it seems as if it's also thanks to you that I'm able to laugh out loud. He then beckons to his servant to assist him with putting on the armor on his body. As expected, the breastplate I prepared earlier fits perfectly with Emperor Jovane's body. Yes, it seems to fit extremely well. Have all the knights finished preparing? Emperor Jovanes asked the commander of the Imperial Knights. Yes, your majesty. A total of 10 knights, including myself, will be accompanying you, your majesty. The Imperial Knight, who looked fierce at first glance, approached us. It was an appearance that reminded me of the social patriarch. I took a quick look at that appearance, then snuck in behind and asked Jovanes, your majesty, if you don't mind, may I join you in going to the forest as well? Hmm? You, Florentia? The Emperor widened his eyes and asked again with an expression of surprise. Yes, it's the last day of the competition, and I wanted to go into the woods at least once, but I haven't had the chance to yet. But it's quite dangerous for a young lady to enter, the Emperor said with troubled expression. I knew he would say that, loading the words I had prepared earlier. I gave a smile to Emperor Jovanes and said, with the strong Emperor and the capable Imperial Knights beside him, what safer place is there in the Empire? Sure enough, the corners of the Emperor's mouth curved up, and his smile became indescribably sunnier. The expression of the stiff and stony-faced Imperial Knights commander also twitched slightly. Oh ho ho, that's right. All right then, let's head into the forest together. Wow, thank you for allowing me to do so, your majesty. I bowed my head to Emperor Jovanes and gave a small nod to the commander of the Imperial Knights. I'll protect your safety, Lady Lombardi, the commander of the knights said in a low voice. As slash slash slash. I knew this was going to happen. Around an hour had passed since we had entered into Madman's forest. The Emperor's party and I had met a man. That man was Perez, who had a bow in one hand. Although it seemed as if our paths crossing had been nothing but a coincidence, I wasn't sure. Was it really just a coincidence? I had known that something like this would have happened, so I made an excuse to follow the Emperor. I had the strong feeling that whatever Perez had prepared would occur today, at the end of the hunting competition. Your Majesty, this place here is... Perez, who was about to say something to Emperor Jovain, suddenly found me in the cluster of people and stopped talking abruptly. He had an expression that seemed to ask me, what are you doing here? I smiled, gave him a look that conveyed that I was just here to watch. I just came here to sightsee. But Perez, whose face was stiff, couldn't take his eyes off me. Ah, so the second prince was also hunting around here. Eventually, Jovains ended up being the one to bring up the coincidence first. Yes, Your Majesty, since this is a place where dangerous monsters tend to come out, why don't I bring you to a different area? Perez said, turning to glance back at the Emperor and the commander of the knights. Is that so? But I thought we were still quite close to the entrance. Yes, I'll take you someplace safer. At Perez's words, the Emperor turned to glance back at the commander of the Imperial Knights. I'd rather do that. His Highness would know more about what happens inside the forest compared to us. In the end, the Emperor and I moved in succession to follow after Perez, with the 10 Imperial Knights trailing behind. It seemed as if we were going somewhere safer near the entrance of the forest, but Perez was leading us back. Could it possibly be this? Then all of a sudden it happened. Kyak! A monster with sharp claws suddenly appeared whilst letting out a strange scream. And the one it happened to jump towards also unexpectedly happened to be the Emperor. The Imperial Knights quickly rushed forward in an attempt to protect the Emperor. Ping! However, Perez's arrow reached him first. The arrow flew to its mark on the monster's side, falling down in that instant. But the monster didn't come alone. The next monster immediately appeared after the first had fallen. However, the direction it came from this time was not ideal. It was approaching from the blind spot of the Imperial Knights. Heyo! Emperor Javanes quickly stepped back in surprise, but it seemed as if the monster had succeeded in striking him. Kiyak! Then, right in front of him, the monster's horrible shriek suddenly sounded. Then, when the monster's long claws finally reached the Emperor's breastplate, suddenly, a blue light suddenly flashed, splitting the monster in half and falling to the floor. Ha, ha! Emperor Jovanes blinked, letting out a steady breath of relief, as if he was deflating. Then, the Emperor used both hands to fumble up for his armor, tracing them. There were long claw marks embedded in the gold armor. Your Majesty, are you all right? In an instant, the knights made a camp to guard the surroundings and shouted, It's only a graze on my armor. It's not a big deal. Don't fuss. Even at this moment, the Emperor pretended to be strong, even though I could still see all his fingers trembling. Please wear this instead. Paris, who sheathed his sword and came to his side, took off what he was wearing, saying to the Emperor, "A heavily scratched armor won't be able to hold up if it's attacked again." Emperor Jovaine's gaze at that moment immediately turned to Paris' body, which didn't have any armor on at all. All right, I should do that. In the end, the red armor Paris was wearing was instead wrapped around the Emperor's body. At that moment, my eyes met Paris. Paris' red pupils seemed to pierce deeply into my own. Be careful, Paris said to me. Without replying, I stared intently at Paris' face. It was him who asked me to make sure that the armor I had prepared for the Emperor would be gold. Let's quickly head back, Emperor Jovain said, much to no one's surprise. It's that way. Paris moved to the front and took the lead again as he said so. And not long after, I came to realize what Paris' plan had been all along. First Prince, Astana appeared in front of us, who were constantly moving. He held a sword in one hand, limping and covered in monster's blood from head to toe. Astana was smiling, and then he suddenly started running towards us, to be exact, to the Emperor who was right next to me. Stop, the commander shouted. The knights quickly ran to defend the Emperor, while others ran out to stop Astana. Please stop, but Astana was too fast. As if he was possessed by something. Astana ran out, slipping away from the knights. It was a monstrous force. I'll kill you. Astana, who let out a horrible shriek, closed the distance. Damn it. The commander who was at the side of the emperor guarding him eventually pulled out his sword. For an imperial knight, pointing a sword at the crown prince was like their last resort. The commander of the imperial knights clenched his teeth before clashing with Astana's sword. Cha-ing. As the sword was flung far away, Astana's hands became empty. Your Highness, please calm down. Balzac, who had abandoned his sword in front of the Imperial Knights and run after Astana, hurriedly shouted as he gasped for breath. And it was that at that moment, die! Astana screamed desperately, swinging something. Krrrr. A scratchy noise rang clearly in my ears, but it wasn't the Emperor's scream that followed. Oh, it was Astana who was rolling frantically on the ground, as if he had lost his mind, letting out a painful cry. My hand! Ugh, it hurts! My hand! Astana's right hand was gone. Other than the red blood that gushed out endlessly, there was nothing else that was there. Ah. The hand that had been cut off was at the feet of a frozen stiff Belsac, which was still tightly holding onto a sharp dagger, whilst everyone was still frozen. Commander, protect His Majesty, Paris ordered, in a low voice, looking down coldly at Astana, who was still rolling on the floor. Yes, the stiff-faced commander replied, picking up the dagger that had fallen on the floor, together with Astana's hand. Handing it over to a deputy, he said, Keep it safe. It's evidence left of the Emperor's alleged assassination. It was the moment Astana became a sinner. Then Paris approached me. He reached out a hand to my face. Blood spluttered out. Whilst standing next to the Emperor, it seems that Astana's blood had also splattered onto me. Paris' hand touched my cheek and began carefully wiping off the dried blood on my face. Sorry, when he had cut off Astana's hand, the unconcerned Paris had knit his brows into a scowl. I'm sorry, Tia, Paris said in a low voice. Astana screamed, which was still ringing, and the voice of the commander was also heard saying, We have to find out what his motive was, or if there was someone else behind him pulling the strings, so we have to keep him alive. It was the voice of Emperor Jovain who had been forgotten for a moment. The Emperor had a wry smile on his face and was stroking the armor's red breastplate. It was the part that had a shallow sword mark that had been made by Astana. In the end, like this. The Emperor looked at Astana, muttering words of unknown significance. Paris also looked at Astana and spat out. It could be because of the magic. Magic? In the blood of the monsters living in Madman's forest flows a dark spell. It's said that it can trigger the emergence of a man's deepest desires. Maybe that's why he lost his rationality and suddenly changed. Desire, you say? The eyes of the mumbling Jovains gradually cooled down. Second Prince, Jovains called to Paris and called out an imperial order. Escort the prince back to the palace. ///. The emperor's procession was returning from the hunting competition. Empress Rabini, who had come out to the front of the palace in order to be the first to greet the emperor, was there. Emperor Jovains got off from the first and most luxurious carriage. Then Paris got off the next carriage that had followed behind him. But it was strange. No one had gotten off Astana's carriage. Your Majesty, where is the first prince? It happened just as Empress Rabini had started to ask her question. Mother! Someone at the back of the procession had suddenly burst into tears. Empress Rabini, who had just casually looked in that direction, unintentionally let out an expression of shock and horror. Prince! How come? Astana, whose whole body was covered with dried and hardened blood, cried mournfully as soon as he saw the Empress. Mother, gasped. Then Rabini, who finally noticed Astana's bandaged right hand, let out a silent scream. Your Majesty, what's going on? How can this be? But Emperor Jovains gave no reply. He only spoke with the tone of the Empress. The first prince, drag him away. You can't, Empress Rabini shouted, standing in front of Astana and blocking him. Just what just what kind of sin did the prince commit for you to do this? Furthermore, to even injure the prince, the charge is the attempted assassination of the emperor and treason. The empress' eyes widened in shock. Emperor Jovanes answered coldly and went up the stairs, leaving the frozen empress all alone. Let me go. Mother! Mother! Astana was dragged away, still calling for the Empress. But this time, Empress Rabini couldn't stop them either. No way, there's no way. Perez passed by in front of the Empress, who was in a state of shock, still murmuring her disbelief. At that moment, Rabini's blue eyes met Perez's red ones. You. Passing by the Empress, who had begun to grasp the situation, Perez gave an order to the commander. Keep the sinner in prison. I'm going to interrogate him myself. Following behind Emperor Jovane's footsteps and going up the stairs, the corner of Perez's mouth quietly twisted up into a smirk. End of chapter 204. Chapter 205. The whole country was in a state of disarray. It was only a natural reaction to the fact that the first prince had attempted to kill the emperor, but was caught in the act by the imperial knights. The nobles also became restless. In the meantime, those who had been currying for favor behind Astana were stunned and anxious to be seen well by Perez. Although he was the first and legitimate prince that was sired by the empress, it was all useless in the face of the fearsome charges of attempted assassination and treason. There are nobles lining up in front of the second prince's Poilak Paras every day. Bate reported to me, even now, they're still trying to gain favor and follow behind Perez, but I don't know if I can say that. Perez will not push them away. He is not a crown prince who cuts off those who choose not to follow him. But he'll definitely cut off the heads of some of those who had opposed him. How many people still remain on the Empress side these days? There are a lot more than we expected. Bate answered my question while shrugging his shoulders. First off, right now, the power of the few remaining loyal households, including Angenas and their vassal families, are still quite strong. There are also many who have been married into the Angenas family through the arrangement of the Empress. You're saying those that can no longer sever their connections with the first prince are still standing firm? There is a rumor going around that the first prince was out of his mind when he tried to kill the emperor. The amount of people that also want to take the external factors into account are also not small in number. So was he in his right mind? I can still clearly remember Astana's face from that day, when he was rushing forward with a knife. He definitely must have been out of his mind. Sure enough, Bates shook his head. He was drunk on magic, to the point where he would not have been able to recognize his mother or father. But it's probably not easy for someone to get so drunk on magic to that extent, am I right? Bate nodded. This time, even if it was Madman's Forest or catching a monster, it was not easy for magic to spread to that extent. Furthermore, for it to be near the entrance of Madman's Forest as well, could he have possibly taken some sort of medicine that could absorb magic? The fact that Bates says it like that means that he can't reveal the exact source, but there was definitely information that had come in about it. Medicine, you say? It was Perez. Even from the beginning, it was him who had proposed to hold a hunting competition in Madman's Forest. Repairing the gold armor for the Emperor was also one of his requests. Did you identify the monster I told you about last time? Yes, Kangpara is a monster with long claws and like Rose, has a habit of collecting items that sparkle. As always, it went according to my expectations. Perez had deliberately led the Emperor down that path in order to swap his own armor. Seems like it's finally started. Perez's revenge. In his previous life, his revenge was long and thorough. Starting from the Crown Prince and working his way up from there, he returned all the pain he had suffered. However, I had never thought of stopping Perez. No, instead, I was planning to help him. I turned to look back at Clarivan and said, Sir Clarivan, it seems like the time to use that is approaching soon. Make sure you've prepared for it properly. Yes, I'll move it to the Lombardy mansion. Clarivan replied with a relaxed smile on his face. Dot. Emperor Jovanes, unable to sleep, poured alcohol into a glass with a haggard complexion. He drinks to the point of unconsciousness and falls asleep under the influence of the alcohol. Then, when he gets up the next morning, he reaches for the liquor bottle once again. It was the recurring daily routine of the emperor after returning from the hunting competition. Eventually, it reached a point where a servant took the initiative to contact Lulak separately. Have a glass, Jovanes said, putting down a glass of liquor in front of Lulak. Are you drinking this kind of hard liquor every day? Lulak asked while frowning as his forehead wrinkled. I can't sleep well unless I drink this. A weak Jovanes replied, helplessly. Even so, he quickly poured the golden liquor into his mouth and swallowed it in one gulp. I wish I could convey some good news to your majesty. But Lulak broke the silence and started to talk, putting the wine glass back down without tasting it. You need to pay attention to the public sentiment that's going on outside the palace. Emperor Jovanes frowned at the truth in Lulak's word and grimaced, pressing down on his temple. It meant that he didn't want to hear it, but Lula continued to speak, disregarding the emperor's actions. The rumor regarding the first prince's assassination attempt on you has spread, making the public anxious. Furthermore, Lulak deliberately dragged out the end of his sentence to incite Javain's curiosity. The story of the Brown family has become a hot topic again. The Brown family, Javains, who was already pouring his second glass, suddenly lifted his eyes. What exactly is the rumor? It was the old rumor about the Ingenis household attacking the Brown household and killing the Brown patriarch more than 40 years ago. So what exactly is that old rumor? Lulak gave Javains a look that seemed to ask, "Do you really want to know?" After a moment of silence, Lulak opened his mouth. "Isn't the first prince, who is the legitimate heir, going crazy and trying to kill the emperor, a punishment and retribution for betraying and abandoning the Brown household, who were loyal subjects long ago?" "Well, that's the rumor." "What sort of nonsense?" Jovains was outraged. "But that's not something I did, is it? That's something that the late emperor did." Jovains felt wronged. It had been the late emperor's decision to support and back the Anjana's household, which he had remained close with since the time he had been a prince. So in some way, they had turned a blind eye to the ousting of the Browns and the establishment of the Anjanas in the West, joining their children, Jovains and Rabini, in marriage afterwards. Everything had been the late emperor's choice. Why should Jovains himself accept this curse? Already burdened by constant appearances in his dreams and trouble sleeping, he couldn't believe that he had also been past such a troublesome thing. He was like a man who stood in the way of his child, even in his death. How would the ignorant know any better? Lulak appeared to take Jovain's side soothingly and said, "It's just the hushed whispers are saying that the royal family is receiving retribution for abandoning the Brown family. The Brown family, which is famous among the commoners for their imperial swordsmanship." Humph, Jovain snorted. "I understand why your father felt so bitter about the Brown family. The Brown family, whose imperial swordsmanship excited the populace. The Brown family, what a sight. The jealousy of the emperor is scary. For the Brown family, the price of that jealousy was the destruction of their family. But under the current circumstances, there wouldn't be anyone who could quell such rumors as quickly as the Brown family." "What do you mean?" Jovains, the emperor who hated receiving hate, perked his ears up. "Reinstate the Brown family. If you do that, the futile rumors about the Ingenis would also come down." "The Brown family, you say?" Jovains asked Lulak whilst rubbing his chin. "Wouldn't that be difficult? I mean, reinstating them now after a few decades have already passed. As long as your majesty brings up the Brown family as the topic of conversation at the next aristocratic meeting, everything else will fall into place. The second prince behind him, that wild dog, would take care of it." There must have been a plan to that extent when the Brown family had been snapped over. At least while discussing the Brown family, wouldn't talk of the royal family be blown over. Lulak smiled leisurely. Jovains, who had been agonizing over the issue for a while, replied shortly after, "Okay, I'll do as you say. It just so happened that a noble meeting was also scheduled to be held in a few days, so the timing also made it an appropriate decision." "What are you planning to do about the matter pertaining to the first prince?" At Lulak's question, Jovains downed another glass again. It was because the bloodshot eyes of the late emperor who had brought down the curse suddenly came to his mind. Jovains, who merely shrugged his shoulders, asked Lulak in response, "Do you know why I left the second prince in the hands of the empress?" Lulak had already answered the question in his mind. Ever since the day he had first seen the second prince, living in a dilapidated, detached palace, probably because the second prince greatly resembles the late emperor. "That's right, that's why I've been keeping him far away from me, ever since he was a kid." The truth was that it was actually the first prince that was the product of that curse. Jovains, as if he didn't want to think about it anymore, shook one hand in a swatting motion and said, "I intend to leave this matter to the second prince. After all, he was there with me when it happened, so he'll be able to investigate the details properly. I don't want to worry about it." "Oh dear, bless your soul." Lula clenched his fist tightly in an effort to quell his sudden urge to laugh. When he saw the foolish owner of a fish store entrust it to a cat in front of him, he felt like laughing. "Who left the fish shop with a cat in front of me?" He felt like his sides were going to split from laughing. That. Crash. A loud crash came from the room where the first prince was currently being detained in. "Medicine! Bring me the medicine!" Ah! Desperate screams also leaked through the crevices of the door. At around early evening, when Astana had woken up. Ever since then, he had started screaming like that to no end. What should we do? A prince was still a prince, even if he was imprisoned for an unforgivable sin. Two maids who were assigned to clean up the mess of such a prince became anxious and were at a loss at what to do once they heard the sounds that had leaked out from the inside. "I've already given you all the medicine, though. Should I let the palace know?" It was when the maids, whose eyes were shaking nervously because they couldn't stand it, that someone said, "There's no need." A low voice was heard from behind them. "Your Highness, the second prince." The maids' faces brightened immediately once they saw Perez with the Imperial Knights. You can come back tomorrow morning. Go back. At Perez's command, the maids ran out as if they were fleeing and didn't want to be caught again. Let's head in. Lord Sloane was leading them. As soon as the door opened, Astana's shouts broke loose. Hey, you, do you think you can tie me up like this and leave with your neck intact? Let me go. Now. Oh, excuse me. Astana, who had one foot tied onto the bed, contorted his whole body and screamed, I'll kill you for insulting me like this. Astana's shouting stopped shortly after Perez entered the room. Astana Nerempe Durelli will start the interrogation of your failed assassination attempt on the Emperor and treason. End of chapter 205.